The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in the 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today we're going to talk about Genjo Koan, the problem of everyday life, as Reverend Master translated it. And this is one of Great Master Dogen's most venerated and studied chapters in the Shobogenzo. It's quite subtle. And there's various translations of the title, but I like Reverend Master to use succinct, to the point, the problem of everyday life, because in fact it is talking about everyday practice. It sounds really esoteric in some places, but it's talking about practice. It all comes down to what we do. And I think that's really helpful to bear in mind, especially as sometimes it's quite subtle, hard to understand. I think he's talking about practice. Because Dogen's teachings always have a practical intention. He's poetic, deeply wise, a philosopher, sometimes hard to understand. He was wrote this beautiful poetry, and he always came back to practice. What does this mean for our everyday life? Because it's easy to get caught up in speculation, especially about Dogen. All kinds of scholars have all kinds of theories about what he meant about this and that. Now that's really not the point. It's just, what does it mean for us, Especially when it's hard to understand. It's very easy. You can get caught up in all sorts of thoughts about what he means. But actually, how do we train? How do we deal with our daily life? How do we live? So he starts off. Delusion, enlightenment, training, life, death, Buddhas and all living things are in existence when there is Buddhism. None of the above exist when all is within the truth. Since the way of the Buddha transcends unity and duality, all of the above exist. So you think, what does that mean, When there's Buddhism, there's two things here. When there's Buddhism and when all is within the truth. When there's Buddhism is when we start to train. I'm a Buddhist now, I'm practicing Buddhism. And then there's the sort of duality of delusion and enlightenment. We think in terms of the opposites, doing good training, bad training, life, death, Buddhas, the rest of us. All these opposites are there when we just first start training. And then when all is within the truth refers to when you've gone beyond that beginning stage and we've had some understanding maybe, whether it's a gradual understanding or a sudden understanding, a bit more grasp of things, as it were. And we go beyond that duality of, delusion, enlightenment, Buddhas, ordinary beings and all that. And they don't exist for us anymore because we've gone beyond those opposites. All things are one within the truth, he says. However, he says, the way of the Buddhas goes beyond both these things. It goes beyond the unity and beyond the duality, beyond all of these things. So all of the things exist, It's like first there are mountains and rivers, then there's no mountains and no rivers, and then again there's mountains and rivers, because you come back to daily life, daily practice, it comes back to that. All is one and all is different. They don't stand against each other. You can't stay with the all is one, but then you've got to come back to daily life and do your practice and, all the differences, all the conditions of our lives. The problem of everyday life. Whilst we adore flowers, they wither. Weeds go strong. Whilst we long for their destruction. We still have our likes and dislikes. We still love flowers and hate weeds. It still comes up, We still have our tendency to grasp onto some things and push other things away. It doesn't just go away miraculously because we've got beyond all that. For some people it may be so. For most of us, we still love the flowers and we're not so keen on the weeds. When we wish to teach and enlighten all things by ourselves, we're deluded. When all things teach and enlighten us, we're enlightened. Because if we think I'm going to teach and enlighten everybody, We're just being a puffed up self, you know. If I'm giving a talk and I think, oh, this is my wisdom, I myself am teaching, I have something others don't have, I will illumine beings, it's deluded, it's silly, and it's not the way. It's not anything to do with that at all. Thinking I'm some special person, you know, we try not to do that. We're not wiser or better than other people. It's just being a big self doing that. So, on the other hand, when all things teach and enlighten us, when we're willing to learn from other beings, no matter who they may be, from anybody, and from even animals, we learn from our animals, you know, to learn from situations we encounter, to learn from our mistakes. When we're willing to learn from all these things, then we're practicing our enlightenment, our innate enlightenment. Because as we said earlier, being enlightened doesn't mean we've reached some kind of sublime state where we're there forever. It means we're practicing our enlightenment. We're acting on it. We're trying to act in enlightened and wise, compassionate ways. But it's not a fixed thing. Always being willing to go on, always being willing to learn, to know that I could be wrong, you know. That's actually a sign of our innate enlightenment, because we're willing to learn, we're beginning to see, we're willing to recognize our mistakes and learn from them. To enlighten delusion is to become Buddha. That means to see our delusions and let them go. That's manifesting our enlightenment and acting as a Buddha acts. Oh, I've been deluded about this. I'm wrong about this. Oh, I can change. I can do something different. I can learn. Most living things are deluded within enlightenment. We all have an innate enlightenment, but most people don't know it, and so they act in deluded ways. Most of us, you know, we still act in deluded ways. But most living things are deluded within their innate enlightenment. Some are enlightened within enlightenment. Others are deluded within delusion. Some people are deeply and thoroughly wise, you know, enlightened. There are people who have really deep understanding. We never want to kind of belittle that in any way, because when we see them, we kind of read, I think, whoa, you know, there's people who have far more understanding than I do, certainly. And there are people deluded within delusion who don't even know they're deluded because they're so confused. And we have all this spectrum of deluded within enlightenment, enlightenment within delusion, all this. But we're all different, and we all have that innate enlightenment. It's what we do with it that matters. There is no need to know that one is identical with Buddha when Buddha is truly Buddha. For a truly enlightened Buddha expresses his Buddhahood in his daily life. So they don't go around thinking, I'm a Buddha. You know, they just get on with things. They don't even think about being a Buddha. They just act as a Buddha would act, with wisdom and compassion, not thinking about being a Buddha. It's just living an ordinary daily life, as Dogen keeps talking about, as Rabbi Master Jiyu kept talking about, living as an ordinary human being. They say in one of those things, it says, when you've gone beyond the kind of the initial understanding, then you return and the traces of that disappear, they gradually fade away. People don't know you have this understanding because you're not going around looking holy. The taint of holiness fades. So really you're just like an ordinary being, but you're acting with more wisdom and compassion. You're not just acting as you did before. You've changed. To observe objects and voices with complete awareness of body and mind is very different from seeing a reflection in a mirror or the moon reflected in water. To observe with complete awareness of body and mind, when we're really paying attention, then we really see and we really hear. We're not getting our own opinions in the way, not just seeing a reflection of our own thoughts, our own views, you know, what we expect from some situation. It's remarkable how often we see what we expect to see and hear what we expect to hear. Understanding things from our own preconceptions, it's amazing how often we do that, actually. When two people have a conversation, they often go away with completely different ideas of what took place, you know. Especially if it's been an argument. One would say, oh, that person was really unreasonable, lost their temper, but I was nice. I was patient and I was kind. And the other person would say the exact same thing, you know. I have learned through bitter experience not to just listen to one side of a thing, but to say, hear what the other person has to say. How did you perceive that thing? Totally different for you quite often. Sometimes the person will say, yes, actually I lost it, I was really crabby. Very often though we think we've been reasonable and the other person has not. Seeing from our own preconceptions, not with complete awareness of body and mind, but having that self that gets up in the way. And there's usually no intention of misrepresenting something. The person honestly believes their own view. Each person honestly believes, I was reasonable, and that person wasn't. This is a perfect example of seeing things in a distorted way. You know. As Dogen says, even if you see one side of something, the other will still be in shadow. Whether it's a conversation, an argument, or just a thing. Everybody has their own view. Each of us sitting in this room, we all have our own view of what the room looks like, because we're all sitting in a different place. And that's just how it is. You can't see everything. But it's helpful to bear that in mind, that we never see the whole thing, no matter what it is. We always have our own partial view. So when you start making a judgment about somebody, or a judgment about some situation, it's really helpful to bear in mind, I don't know the whole story. I don't know where this person's coming from exactly. I don't know what they're thinking, or I don't know what else might have happened in this situation. You know, looking at the news, you sort of leap to conclusions about things that we don't see the whole thing necessarily. Then maybe later on something else comes out. Oh, well, that puts a new complexion on the whole matter. Happens over and over again in our daily life, in the things we read and see, over and over again, to remember we don't see the whole picture. Really helpful to remember. You see one side of something, the other still in shadow. When one studies Buddhism, one studies oneself. When one studies oneself, one forgets oneself. When one forgets oneself, one is enlightened by everything. And this very enlightenment breaks the bonds of clinging to both body and mind, not only for oneself, but for all beings as well. This is a very well-known and oft-quoted piece, and different translators put it in different ways depending on how they understand it. But I like to go with what Reverend Master Jiyu understood it to mean, what Dogen meant. When we study Buddhism, we study ourself, my little selfishness, looking to see my selfishness. And it's in my face all the time. You say, oh my goodness, look at this. If we're really looking. Studying the self, to see our selfishness and to try to let it go. To see how it affects our thoughts, our speech, our actions, because it's everywhere actually, and when we don't know, we haven't started to study the self, we can be completely oblivious and think we're just being a reasonable, nice, ordinary person, and in fact we start to look and we think, ooh, self-partiality. I'm seeing everything from my point of view, my thing, my family, my cat, my this, that, and the other thing, my view, my opinions, my everything. And then we do that, and then we start to let it go. We start to forget the self. One studies oneself, one forgets the self. One starts to let go of that self-partiality and see things from a bigger perspective, wider, you know. Seeing our selfishness as painful, but necessary, and it helps us to let it go, to begin to relinquish that grip on ourselves. Because selfishness causes suffering and blinds us to our actions or the consequences of our actions. We don't see that selfishness until we start to look, studying the self. And then studying the self, we can start to let it go. Begin to forget the self, to stop making that the center of our life. No longer just thinking of what I want and what I don't want, what I like and what I don't like, but actually going beyond that. What's good to do here? What's best? Is a whole different perspective than what do I want, you know. And sometimes we do what we want, but which is okay, but not always thinking, what do I want here? But what's best to do here? What do I need to do? It's not always what we want, you know. We know that. Try to live by what is good to do, not but just my own partiality. That's how we stop creating suffering, because living from selfishness creates suffering. to stop doing that as best we can, helps us to stop creating suffering. Very simple, not always easy. And when we're living from what is good to do, from our true nature, rather than from what I want, we're enlightened by everything, as Dogen says. To forget the self is to be enlightened by everything. We're actualizing our enlightenment in our training. We're practicing our enlightenment. Using everything to help us. Everything helps us. We can learn from everything. Everything teaches us. As Dogen says, this very enlightenment breaks the bonds of clinging to both body and mind, not only for oneself, but for all beings as well. When we let go of our selfishness and do what's truly good, it affects other people as well, because they think, oh yes, you're right, that's good to do, let's do that. It affects people in unseen ways, and sometimes we see, how that might help. But we're not going around being a selfless being. Here I am being selfless, It's a bit of an oxymoron. But to just do our best to let go of our self-partiality, our selfishness, our selfish desires, and do what's really good. And that helps others to do the same, as I said. Dogen says, if the enlightenment is true, it even wipes out clinging to enlightenment. Therefore it is imperative that we return to and live in the world of ordinary people, as I was saying, when we have some understanding of truth, whether it's a sudden illumination or just a gradual turning up of the dimmer switch, as Rev Master would say, a gradual understanding, growing understanding. When we have that understanding, or it's beginning to come to us, it's not our possession. When there's that, we don't cling to it. We try not to cling to it. We can't think, I've understood the truth now, I'm enlightened, because that is immediately unhelpful, gets in our way. We think I am enlightened or I have understood the truth. We're completely missing it, because it's got nothing to do with a me, a self understanding something. It's totally, it just knocks me out of the water actually. It's totally beyond that. So we just live in an ordinary way. We're not a special person. We're not living some special radiant life. We're just living as an ordinary human being, whether we're a monk or a layperson or whoever we may be, just living an ordinary daily life, doing our best to practice compassion and wisdom, kindness, as we said. There are people who deeply inspire us because of their deep understanding, their deep practice. And we see them. I've met a few, and you think, whoa, but what you see in them is not so much their great wisdom, but their great kindness. This great kindness, that's what comes out, more than this great wise being, but this incredible kindness and modesty, not a great special person. And we can all practice kindness. We can all do that. So it's not something that we can't aspire to. That kindness is like the hallmark of somebody who's really relinquishing their selfishness, is really what's the basis of our practice. Just letting go of our selfishness is really what it all comes down to, because everything seems to come down to that. And then we begin to realize that this little self isn't a reality at all. It is normal for a person, while sailing and observing the shore, to think that the shore is moving instead of the boat. But should he look carefully, they will find that it is the boat which is doing the actual moving. It's not the shore, it's the boat. We're in this boat. Dogen's talking about impermanence here, especially our own impermanence. We are constantly changing, all the time. Our little boat is constantly moving. We're not some static, unmoving, unchanging being. In the same way as this, he explains, it is because a person observes everything from a mistaken viewpoint of his body and mind that he comes to the conclusion that they're eternal, that our body and mind is eternal. However, should he learn to observe them correctly, as a result of penetrating truth, he or she will discover that no form whatsoever attaches itself substantially to anything. You can't cling on to anything. No form, no thought, no body, no mind. We can't cling on to our body or mind and prevent them from changing. It's apparent. The body, I think we said the other day, it changes all the time from when we're a small infant to we grow up and then we get old and then we eventually die. We can't control that, Constantly it changes. Our mind constantly changes. Our thoughts constantly change. Our views change from childhood to adulthood to becoming a Buddhist to old age to when we're dying. Our view of things, our mind, our ability to think, when we're old and our marbles are trickling away into the gutter, well, our mind will not be the same as it was when we were 25. It's perfectly fine. We can't cling on to any of it. It's okay. But that heart, that steadfast heart of training, Buddha nature, that does not trickle away. So when we have some understanding of truth, we can see that there isn't an unchanging separate self in any of this. Not in the body, not in the mind. There isn't a separate, special self. There's Buddha nature, but that's not the same as the self, not at all. We can't cling on to anything. The wood that is burnt upon a fire becomes ashes. It does not again become wood. You must not think that wood comes first and ashes afterwards. You must clearly understand that a piece of burning wood has both a before and an after. However, in spite of the fact that it has before and after, it is cut off therefrom. Ashes, however, have before and after. In the same way that wood does not again become wood after becoming ashes, so in the very same way man is not reborn again as man, human, after dying. This is not easy to understand. I sat with this, I thought, what is he on about? Try to understand it. Dogen is clearly using the analogy of burning firewood to explain about we don't come back to life after we die, but it's not that simple, The whole rebirth thing, I'll talk about another day. That's a whole other matter. But he's talking about we don't come back to life as we were. He's talking about time as well as life and death. When a piece of wood is burning, it's just a piece of burning wood. Before this, it was firewood. Later on, it'll be ashes. Right now, it's just a piece of burning wood. The firewood time is gone. It's not ashes yet. It's just a piece of burning wood right now in this moment. It's cut off from before and after. Each moment is, in a sense, separate from the moment before and the moment after. Here we are sitting in this room. Here we are listening to this talk. We're not having lunch. We're not having breakfast. We're sitting here right now. This is what we're doing. There is no lunch. There is no breakfast. It's just this very moment is all we have right now. And to keep coming back to that is a really helpful practice, because then we can relinquish the clinging to what I did before or what I'm going to do later, and just try to be present here and now in this moment. We get distracted, we come back. We get pulled off, we come back. We start worrying about the future, we come back. Dwelling on the past, we keep coming back. So this piece of burning wood, it has a before and an after. Yes, it was firewood. Yes, it will be ashes. But right now, it's just a piece of burning wood. Right now, we're just here in this body and mind. Right just in this moment. And the ashes won't become wood again. They're just ashes. There'll always be ashes, whatever they are. Or then they'll, melt into the ground or whatever they do. But they won't go back to being wood. In the same way, he says, man is not reborn again as man after dying, meaning human, both man and woman. I told you the other day, man doesn't mean just men, because there's the old way of describing it. Man is not reborn again as man after dying. We are not reborn again as we were after we've died. There isn't a continuous, unchanging soul, or mind that goes from life to life. As we talked about just the other day, we mentioned this. There's not an unchanging thingy. And this is Dogen's point. There's not an unchanging me that goes on. So we can stop clinging so tightly to this me that's the center of the universe. It's trying to get us to relinquish the grip on me, mine, what I want, what I need, what I don't like, and all that. And as I said, this is not a negation of rebirth. We'll talk about that in a couple of days. He says, it is therefore correct for Buddhism to say that life does not become death, and equally true to say that death does not become life. The Buddha himself constantly preached this. As Reverend Master Jiyu said, when there is life, there is only life, just this moment now. When there's death, there's only death, just this moment now. Life doesn't become death, death doesn't become life. They're both just moments in time. One does not become the other, We're not trying to get away from either life or death. As we said yesterday, they're right here, life and death. Now there's life, now there's death. And Dogen says, the above two views are called non-life and non-death. The two, life and death, are simply positions in time, as are spring and winter. Winter no more becomes spring than spring becomes summer. At one time there's winter, at another time there's spring, at another time there's summer. In spring there's no winter, it's gone, and there's no summer. It hasn't come yet, it's just spring. Just this moment is all we have. Just this moment, right now. That's what he's trying to say, I think. And with all of this chapter, there are all sorts of different interpretations, different views about it. I think it's all a lot more subtle and profound than anything I can explain or even understand. But that's what I understand for now. This is what I think he's trying to say. And I think actually, maybe it's simpler than we think in some ways, but it's subtle, It's the problem of everyday life. It's how we do our training, how we live our life right now. Not getting caught up into some intellectual sort of, what is he talking about, wood and ashes and firewood and boats on the shore? What is he on about, Just to think, what he's trying to do is get us to relinquish clinging to this unchanging self, to relinquish clinging to our self-partiality, my view of me as the center of the universe. That's what I think the bottom line is, really. Not to cling to anything, not to cling to ideas about life, death, delusion, enlightenment, all these things that he talks about. Not to cling to our body or mind or an unchanging self, but to let everything come and go and relinquish our grip, thinking we've understood something. Oh, no, I get it, I understand. Maybe I don't. Can I learn from everything? Can I have an open mind and consider? Maybe I don't completely understand this. Maybe there's more than meets the eye. Whether I'm reading Dogen, whether I'm talking to somebody, whether I'm listening to a problem, or just living my life, there's more to this whole thing than meets the eye. I don't know everything. I don't know the whole situation. I don't know what the person's thinking. I can never know exactly what it's like to be another person. And they don't know what it's like to be me. All I can do is just do the best I can to act with sympathy and kindness and with wisdom as much as I can, and to actualize our own innate enlightenment, not by thinking I'm enlightened and here I am, but just by doing our best to let go of that clinging on to a me, to my views, myself, my life, my body, my mind. Everything comes and goes, just flowing through that water. Just let it all flow through. And I think that's really what he's trying to tell us in this chapter. Letting go of our views and opinions.